They carefully examined her ID, doubted her credentials, and summoned security completely unaware that they were about to turn away the one person who could bring their entire operation to a halt with a single phone call. For months, the idea had quietly simmered in the back of her mind, almost like a seed planted in the shadows. At first, it was too small to notice, easy to dismiss as a passing thought. But the more she pondered it, the more it gnawed at her, pushing its way to the forefront of her mind. Ava Donovan had built a thriving financial empire from nothing. Beacon Financial, a company that stood as a testament to her hard work and vision. She wasn't the type to hide behind a desk in a plush office somewhere. Ava had spent years ensuring that Beacon was built differently, focused on inclusivity, fairness, and accessibility. But now, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The question that plagued her was simple. Was Beacon really as fair as she thought it was? For months, Ava had heard quiet whispers, rumors about how customers from certain communities were treated less favorably at some of their branches. These were subtle hints, not enough to cause an uproar, but enough to make her wonder. Offhand remarks from trusted employees, casual comments from friends, nothing concrete, just a persistent unease. At first, she had dismissed them. After all, Beacon had solid policies in place to ensure equality and customer satisfaction. They were built on a foundation of integrity and customer-first values, but policies were just words. Real change didn't come from well-written statements, it came from action. That's when Ava made the decision. She didn't want to hear about these issues secondhand anymore. She needed to see for herself, to experience it from the perspective of a regular customer, not as the CEO or the founder, but as someone who was simply trying to do business. Today, she was just another woman walking into a bank. No tailored suit, no silk blouse, no designer shoes, just a cozy sweater, casual jeans, and comfortable sneakers. She parked her car in the lot of a Beacon Financial branch in Indianapolis, Indiana, location she had personally approved for construction 3 years ago. She remembered the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the handshakes with the branch manager, the photos, and her speech about how trust was the cornerstone of good banking. But today, she wasn't the CEO. She wasn't the founder. Today, Ava Donovan was just another customer. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and the scent of freshly printed forms mixed with industrial-grade air freshener filled the lobby. It was a quiet afternoon. A few customers were standing in line. A couple of others sat in the waiting area, and at the far end of the room, a teller was busy balancing a drawer of cash. Ava adjusted her shoulder bag and walked up to the counter. The young teller, early 20s, with fair skin and dark hair tied back into a no-nonsense ponytail, glanced up from her screen. No greeting, no smile, just a brief once-over before her eyes quickly returned to the computer. Ava cleared her throat. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal." The teller didn't look up from her work. Without a word, she slid a clipboard across the counter. "Fill this out." It was a standard withdrawal form: name, account number, amount, nothing unusual. Ava pulled a pen from her bag and filled in the details. $5,000, not a massive amount, but enough to trigger the usual ID verification process. She pushed the clipboard back toward the teller. That's when things started to change. The young teller's eyes flicked over the form, then scanned Ava's ID. Her brow furrowed, lips pressing into a tight line. There was a shift in the air, something felt off, an odd pause that hadn't been there just moments before. Ava waited, giving the teller the benefit of the doubt. The teller glanced up again, this time meeting Ava's gaze. Then she hesitated, a beat too long. A moment of uncertainty that didn't belong. In that split second, Ava understood. It wasn't about the withdrawal. It wasn't about policy or security protocols. It was about who they thought she was. The teller's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, after a long moment of indecision, she slowly placed Ava's ID on the counter instead of continuing the transaction. I'll be right back," the teller muttered. Ava's eyes narrowed as the teller grabbed the ID and disappeared through a door into the manager's office. She exhaled slowly, tapping her nails lightly on the smooth marble counter. She had expected to be treated differently. She just hadn't anticipated this. But something in her gut told her this was only the beginning. And Ava wasn't going anywhere, not until she got answers. Leaning against the counter, she watched the teller vanish behind the frosted glass door. The atmosphere in the lobby had thickened. The tension was palpable, like an unspoken truth was hanging in the air. Ava surveyed the room, noting the subtle details. A man in a wrinkled suit stood to spots behind her, waiting for his turn. His tie was loosened, as if he had rushed from work. When he stepped up to the counter, the teller greeted him immediately, without hesitation. Across the room, an older woman wearing a floral dress was chatting casually with another teller. No scrutiny, no hesitation, just smooth, effortless service. Ava turned back to the counter, her jaw tightening. She had been standing there for nearly 5 minutes now. Waiting for an explanation. Waiting for something that shouldn't even be happening. But Ava knew. She knew exactly what was going on. This wasn't about banking policy. If it were, the teller would have explained what the issue was. She wouldn't have walked off without a word. No, this was something else. The door finally swung open, and the young teller reappeared. This time, she wasn't alone. A branch manager walked in behind her mid-40s, stocky, with a balding head and rimless glasses. His name tag read, Todd Larson. His expression was polite, but controlled. He wasn't moving toward the counter with the ease of someone simply offering help. No, Todd was sizing her up. Ava knew that look. She had seen it countless times in boardrooms and meetings, but never directed at her. Todd stopped at the counter, offering her a tight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal." Ava nodded once, keeping her voice steady. "Yes, that's right. $5,000, my account, my ID." Todd glanced at the teller, then back at Ava. "Mind if I take a quick look at your identification? Mind?" Ava exhaled, keeping her tone even. "I already gave it to her." Todd didn't respond to the remark. He simply picked up her ID, held it up to the light, and studied it like he was inspecting a forgery. Then he looked back at her. "Miss Donovan, is this your first time banking with us?" Ava's stomach twisted. The question was phrased so carefully. But the meaning was clear. "Do you even belong here?" Her tone sharpened. "I've been banking here since this branch opened." Todd gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if absorbing the information. "And you're withdrawing $5,000. Ava felt her patience begin to slip away. "That's what I wrote down." The lobby had quieted further. Not completely silent, but quieter. A few customers had glanced over, probably noticing the shift in the atmosphere. Todd turned the ID over in his hands. Then, without even making eye contact with her, he asked, "And what do you do for work, Miss Donovan?" Ava let out a sharp laugh, though it was more out of disbelief than amusement. There it was. The moment when professionalism slipped just enough for the truth to peek through. She tilted her head, studying him with a new resolve. "I'm in finance," she replied carefully. Todd's smile grew tighter. "Oh, what kind of finance?" Ava let the silence stretch between them before she spoke again. "Banking," she said flatly. That made Todd pause just for a second. But rather than stepping back, he doubled down. "I see," he said, drawing out the words slowly. "And this is a personal account, correct?" "Not a business account." Ava folded her arms across her chest. "That's what it says on the form." Todd nodded again, but this time it felt mechanical. He glanced back at the teller. Another moment of hesitation. Then, seemingly reaching some invisible conclusion, he placed Ava's ID back on the counter. "Unfortunately, we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time." Ava blinked, trying to process the words. "What?" Ava straightened, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Excuse me?" Todd's expression remained calm, but his words came slowly, deliberately. "We're unable to verify the transaction." Ava felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "You have my ID, you have my account number. What's there to verify?" Todd clasped his hands together, nodding solemnly. "It's just a precaution." We take security very seriously. Security. There it was, the word people used when they didn't want to say what they really meant. Ava's fingers curled into tight fists against her palms. This wasn't about fraud. This wasn't about banking policies. This was about something else entirely. But Ava wasn't leaving. Not now, not without an answer. Todd wasn't done yet. He had one more thing to say. And when he did, Ava knew things were about to escalate. She let his words sink in. We're unable to verify the transaction. Her gaze flicked between Todd and the teller, watching them both, waiting, hoping that one of them would realize their mistake, process the withdrawal, and let her walk out without another word. But neither of them moved. Ava exhaled slowly, her palms pressing flat against the counter. "Todd," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "what exactly needs to be verified?" Todd kept his hands clasped in front of him, his face an impassive mask. Too impassive. "Well, Miss Donovan, large cash withdrawals require additional security steps. We just need to confirm a few details before proceeding." Ava arched a brow, her patience beginning to thin. "Like what?" Todd hesitated for a split second, his eyes shifting to the teller, then back to Ava. "Just some basic account verification. Can you tell me the last deposit amount made to this account?" Ava froze, staring at him. That wasn't standard procedure. Sure, security questions were normal, but that question, not for a simple withdrawal with a valid ID. Ava could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The unspoken challenge. Was this a test? A way to make her prove she had access to her own money? Her fingers curled into tight fists against the smooth marble countertop. "I don't have that number memorized," she said evenly, "but if you pull up my account like you would for any other customer, you'll see all my deposits." Todd gave her a thin, measured smile. "Of course. But in the interest of security, we need to make sure the account holder can confirm certain details first." Ava's jaw tightened, but she didn't let her frustration show. "I just gave you my ID." Todd didn't flinch. "I understand. But you'd be surprised how often fraudulent IDs get through." Fraudulent. Ava took a slow breath, trying to keep her calm. "I'm not withdrawing millions. It's $5,000, a small fraction of what I have in this account. I've already followed protocol. So, let me ask again, what's the real issue here?" Todd's expression didn't waver. "We're just doing our due diligence, Miss Donovan." Ava's patience was wearing thin. "Todd," she said, her voice controlled, "if I were a man in a tailored suit, would you be asking me these questions?" The words landed with precision. A flicker of something crossed his face, too quick to catch, but it was there. A shift in posture, a tightening around the eyes. Then, just as quickly, his professional mask returned. "This isn't about appearance," he said smoothly, his tone calculated. "It's about policy." Ava let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that right?" Todd tilted his head slightly, clearly weighing his next words carefully. "Would you like to try using a different form of verification?" he suggested, his voice turning patronizing. "Perhaps a utility bill?" "A second form of ID, a utility bill?" Ava couldn't help it. She let out a disbelieving breath, shaking her head. "You want me to provide a second form of ID for my own bank account? Where you're currently holding my money?" Todd didn't blink. Ava's eyes narrowed, and she tapped her nails lightly on the counter, her patience fraying. "Okay, let's do this another way. Pull up my account," she said firmly. Todd hesitated, his fingers twitching toward the keyboard, but unsure whether he should comply. "You have my name," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You have my ID. If you check my file, you'll see that I've been banking here since day one, that I helped open this branch, that I probably signed off on some of your training materials." Todd remained silent, his gaze steady on Ava. Ava leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make the point land. "You might want to check before you dig this hole any deeper." Todd's lips pressed together in a tight line, his composure cracking just a little. The young teller, who had been watching quietly from the sidelines, shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between Ava and Todd. For a moment, Ava wondered if Todd would finally cave. If he would backtrack, apologize, and handle the situation the way it should have been handled from the beginning. Instead, Todd let out a short, reluctant breath, as if making a decision in his mind. "I'm sorry, Miss Donovan," he said smoothly, his voice still controlled. "Without additional verification, we can't process this withdrawal today." Ava felt a rush of heat in her chest. Not from embarrassment, from sheer anger. She could feel the eyes of customers nearby, subtle glances flicking in her direction. They were sensing the tension, but pretending not to notice, as if hoping this would blow over quickly. She could hear the measured politeness in Todd's voice. The kind that let her know he wasn't concerned about security at all. No, he had already decided she didn't belong here. And nothing she said would change that, but Todd had just made a critical mistake. Because if he had simply processed the transaction, this could have ended right here. Now, Ava was about to make him regret it. Before she could speak again, Todd did something that sent a fresh wave of disbelief rushing through her. Something that turned the frustration into pure, simmering outrage. Ava barely had time to react before Todd did the unthinkable. He reached beneath the counter, pressed a discreet button near the register, and called over security. A uniformed guard, broad-shouldered, hand resting near his belt, stepped out from a back office, his expression unreadable. But Ava knew exactly what this was. A bank manager refusing to process a customer's request was one thing. Calling over security was something else entirely. It wasn't just a refusal, it was a statement. It was an escalation. And it made Ava's stomach tighten in disbelief. Ava let out a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She had dealt with men like Todd before, the ones who didn't expect pushback, the ones who made it their mission to remind certain people where they stood. But Ava wasn't going to play along. She lifted her chin slightly, locking eyes with Todd. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice steady and unwavering. Todd gave a carefully neutral expression, but Ava could see the slight tension in his jaw. "We just want to ensure a smooth experience for all our customers," he replied, his tone polished to be genuine. A smooth experience, as if Ava was the one making a scene. She cut him off before he could finish. "You know what's funny, Todd?" She took a step closer to the counter, her voice low and controlled. "I watched you process that man's transaction 10 minutes ago. No extra verification, no manager intervention, no security." Todd's expression stiffened, but he didn't respond. Ava leaned in, her eyes locking with his. "I wonder what's different about me." The tension in the room shifted. The teller quickly looked down, avoiding eye contact. The security guard shifted slightly, his stance less rigid now, but Todd remained unmoved. He stood firm, his expression still locked in that too calm demeanor. "You're refusing to allow me access to my own account, despite providing government-issued identification, while other customers aren't being asked to provide anything extra." Todd's jaw tightened, a clear sign of agitation. Ava turned slightly, angling her phone so the camera could catch the security guard's reaction. "And you were called over for what reason, exactly?" she asked, her voice steady but piercing. The guard hesitated, glancing quickly at Todd before meeting Ava's gaze. Ava didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She didn't give them a chance to control the moment. A thick silence settled in the room, hanging like a cloud, and then Todd made one final mistake. He acted like this was his bank, but it wasn't. It was hers. Ava tilted her phone slightly, ensuring the camera captured his face, the security guard standing in the background, and the palpable tension in the air. Then, in the calmest voice possible, she said, "Todd, let me introduce myself properly." His expression twitched, just for a second, the first sign of real uncertainty. Ava reached forward and plucked her ID from his grip with deliberate ease. She flipped it over in her hand, tapping her finger against the name printed on it. "You see this? This isn't just..." She took a slow step back, slipping her ID into her bag as if the gesture itself was part of her control over the situation. "I built this bank," she said, her voice firm and clear. "From the ground up, I signed the approval for this branch." I personally approved the hiring budget that got you this job." Todd's hands curled into fists, his knuckles white. His entire demeanor shifted. Gone was the forced politeness. What was left now was pure panic. Ava gave Todd a tight-lipped smile, her eyes cold. "And today, I walked in as just another customer, just to see what would happen." She tilted her head slightly, the challenge clear in her gaze. "You know what happened." Todd's eyes flicked nervously to the security guard, as if searching for help. The guard remained silent. The young teller, who had been standing quietly, now stared down at her register, looking like she wanted to vanish into thin air. Ava took a slow, deliberate breath, pulling her phone back up. "Todd, I have a question for you," she said, her voice deadpan. "Would you like me to send this footage directly to corporate, or should I just handle this right now?" Todd visibly paled, the color draining from his face. His mouth opened and closed twice before he found his voice, but it came out shaky. "Miss Donovan, I." His face, once so sure and composed, now lacked every ounce of confidence. The smooth, polished manager, who had dismissed her so easily just minutes ago, now stood rigid, hands gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. The security guard, who had been called over to handle her, now looked awkward, shifting on his feet as he glanced nervously between Todd and Ava, unsure what to do next. Ava exhaled slowly, tapping her nails against the counter in a steady rhythm. "Let me make sure I understand, Todd," she said, her voice ice cold. "Todd, do you think I'm stupid?" His eyes widened slightly, but he stayed silent. "You knew exactly what you were doing," Ava continued, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You looked at me, and in your mind, you already decided I didn't belong here. You put up every roadblock you could to make sure I knew it." Todd shook his head quickly, as if trying to deny the truth. "Miss Donovan, I assure you, that's not what happened." Ava held up her hand, cutting him off with a simple motion. "No," she said, her voice as hard as steel. "I don't want to hear any more rehearsed apologies." She turned to the security guard, her gaze unflinching. "Do you believe I was a security risk?" The guard hesitated, then cleared his throat. After a moment, he gave a small, reluctant nod. "Yes, ma'am, that was my understanding." Ava nodded, acknowledging his response, but not giving him an inch. "And now that you know who I am, are you still under that impression?" The guard glanced at Todd, then back at her, clearly unsure. His posture shifted slightly, his tension easing just a bit. "No, ma'am, I was just following instructions." Ava studied him for a moment, her eyes unwavering. She knew how this played out. Todd would try to pass the blame, pretend this was just some mistake, an overreaction. But this wasn't going away. Ava reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. With deliberate calm, she handed it to the security guard. "Next time, reconsider your involvement. If a customer isn't being disruptive, the first step shouldn't be intimidation." The security guard gave a small nod. "Understood, ma'am." Ava turned to the teller, who was still pretending not to exist, her gaze fixed on the register. "You," Ava said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the silence. The young woman flinched, her body tense. Ava leaned slightly over the counter, her eyes steady. "You saw my ID, you had my account information, and you still decided that I wasn't worth listening to." The teller finally looked up, her eyes wide with panic. "I was just following protocol, ma'am." "Then maybe," Ava said coolly, "you should rethink your protocol." Ava turned on her heel, the sharp sound of her shoes clicking against the polished tile echoing in the quiet room as she made her way toward the exit. The silence in the bank was suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. Todd stood frozen, her business card still clutched in his fingers, his expression one of shock. The teller, her face flushed with embarrassment, looked as though she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. The security guard, who had been so ready to escort her out just moments ago, now looked uncomfortable and sure of himself. And the customers, they had stopped pretending not to watch. Ava paused at the door. Then, with a deliberate, slow turn, she faced the room again. Her gaze locked with Todd's, and in a calm, unwavering tone, she spoke. "This is my bank." The words hung in the air, heavy and resolute. Todd flinched, his body tense with the weight of her statement. The teller shifted nervously behind the counter. Even the security guard, once brimming with confidence, now found himself staring at the floor. Ava took a single step forward, her voice steady but resolute. "I won't stand by and watch customers treated unfairly because of assumptions, biases, or ignorance." Her voice didn't rise in anger, but there was no need for that. Every single person in that room was listening now. "There will be changes," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a promise. "Real changes. Because if this can happen to me, the CEO, then I can only imagine what happens to those who don't have the power to speak up." The room remained still. By the end of the day, Ava had called an emergency meeting with her corporate leadership team. Every branch manager was summoned. Every customer service policy was scrutinized, overhauled. And Todd, he was gone, but Ava's work wasn't done. She rolled out mandatory bias training across every branch. She created a new accountability system, ensuring every employee upheld the bank's highest standards. She encouraged customers to report every instance of discrimination, no matter how small or overlooked before. Within weeks, Beacon Financial transformed. Employees became more mindful of their actions and words. Customers, especially those who had felt invisible or dismissed, finally felt heard, seen, and valued. Because when we refuse to accept anything less, we all win.